It's such a privilege to be here at the Drawing Research Forum because I never thought of myself as someone who draws. Still, one of my earliest political encounters came through drawing. It was in kindergarten in Bali. I was drawing something like this when the boy sitting next to me suddenly frowned. My drawing upset him. He said it was ugly. It wasn't about my technique. He said it was ugly because it wasn't right. What he really meant, as I soon found out, was that the person driving this car shouldn't be a woman. When I asked why not, he scoffed. Women can't drive. But my mama drove us everywhere. Decades later, drawing came back to me, this time unexpectedly during my field practice. I had become an adopted member of several cardboard waste cubicles in central Hong Kong, where thousands of Filipino domestic workers gather on their only day off. One Sunday, left on my own to watch over everyone's things, I began drawing on the cardboard wall. When everyone returned, they were surprised to find that the whole space had changed. Wow, the cardboard feels like wood now, they said. Feels like curtain. Feels like a living room here. So the drawing had changed the cardboard surface, and the cubicle, as they said, felt warmer. The cardboard waste traveled through the informal trade route, and the recycling point's workers noticed it. Also, when my drawings evolved into a kind of field notes. Nice, nice, they said. Now you're drawing the route. But when they found drawings depicting my Filipino host groups, they stopped. Who are these women? They asked. Where are they on the route? What are they doing? This informal route had been established for a decade then, but it was the first time they noted this particular note through the drawings. These three moments are just small examples of how drawing, both as an act and as object, can change things and move people, even in kindergarten. Drawing enters our lives quite early and is relatively a widespread practice. Although many feel that they can't draw, a feeling perhaps nurtured since kindergarten, drawing remains one of the most accessible aesthetic forms available to most of us. It's not surprising then that various mark making, from children's drawing and participatory social drawing to politically charged graffiti, have long been mobilized to provoke dialogue and instigate change, including in many projects of socially engaged art. In dominant strands of socially engaged art discourse, however, human to human relations are favored over aesthetic methods and objects. The intense focus on participation has often sidelined the aesthetic object's capacity to act, to affect, to disturb, even when it lies at the center of a public controversy, as in the collective Taring Padi's banner at Documenta 15, removed after a discovery of anti-Semitic imagery. Despite the controversy's scale, the work's aesthetic agency remains critically under-examined. My kindergarten classmate, the boy who frowned at the drawing of my mom driving, was clearly disturbed by this object that I drew. The drawing's ugliness, wrongness affected and unsettled him. The philosopher Jacques Rancière might read this as a reconfiguration of what he calls distribution of the sensible, a disruption reshaping what can be seen and what can be said. This is the perfect name for what happens, but for a practitioner who can't help but witness such moments unfolding hands on, I'm struck by a question that Rancière perhaps deliberately leaves open. How does this redistribution actually happen? How does an aesthetic act or object like drawing or drawings come to do something in the world? How does it disturb or reconfigure relations? In other words, in these acts and objects, what does aesthetics do? I approach this question through the framework of things in common, a way to understand the moments when objects we assume to be shared are changed through aesthetics into sites of encounters. So, first, I'll briefly outline how this framework understands what aesthetics do. Then, I'll turn to the work of Dryden Goodwin and Helena Cleeve, two drawing practitioners, to examine a further question. What is the agency of drawing, both as aesthetic act and object, in society and politics? Or, put slightly differently, what do drawing and drawings do as things in common? Before I go on, I'd like to state, perhaps the obvious at this point, that I use the term aesthetics here in its very etymological sense, as Ben Highmore reminds us. It's the opposite of anesthetics. If anesthetics makes you numb, its opposite, aesthetics, which I'd say is a kind of counter anesthetics, makes you sense. This is not too different from my wrong kindergarten drawing. It was a counter anesthetic object. In Things in Common, this counter anesthetics, or aesthetics, is a force of reassembly. They transform common things into things in common through sensory engagement, affective stakeholding, and perceptual reconfiguration. In these moments, aesthetics reconfigure relations, micro-level changes that can open further possibilities for larger-scale transformation. Pieces of paper and cardboard are ubiquitous. As a common thing, they hold networks and roots. But even when you and I have a common thing, like a passport, we may never have to relate to each other. Aesthetics change these common things into things in common, bursting bubbles open, readying them for larger scale transformation. This further transformation is still readable through aesthetics. Aesthetics binds imagination and emotion. Ben Anderson and Sarah Ahmed each address these forces separately in political theory, but in Things in Common I bring them together as two forces of social and political life essential in perceptual reconfiguration bound within aesthetics. And this is why an aesthetic object is political. Entering the terrain of larger scale transformation, Things in Common demands a certain aesthetic labor to resonate across scales. We can glimpse this in how images circulate and appearances take on political force, what Karen Stressler calls image events, and Patricia Spire describes as work on appearances. This aesthetic labor of sustaining relation echoes Jean-Luc Nancy's Being in Common. It's iterative, inoperative, and to put it in Rancier's sense, sustained through everyday dissensus. So, to return to my question, what does aesthetics do? Aesthetic change common things into things in common by reassembling imagination and emotion. We can watch this happening almost microscopically through drawings in social settings, which brings me to Helena Cleeve and Dryden Goodwin. Following Stressler, I see Cleeve and Goodwin as powerful visual theorists. Learning how they think along their drawing is invaluable. To do their significant bodies of work justice in such a short talk would be impossible though, so for now I'll focus on what they might teach me about drawing as a thing in common. Helena Cleeve works with people in dementia care through in situ ethnographic drawing. In her writings, she describes this practice as a way to see and unsee matters together. while keeping to questions open and relevant to understand daily life with dementia. Working beyond participation, Cleeve engages residents, staff, and family members in a reciprocal act of drawing. She connects her approach to Donna Haraway's situated knowledge, where care is an ongoing, responsive practice that remains open and unsettled. At times, the notion of seeing and unseeing in Cleeve's practice demonstrates how what's regarded as common knowledge can be appended, becoming knowledge in common through reciprocal drawing. I'm particularly moved by her field notes. In one, she writes that at first everything seems mundane and monotone, but the attention required by drawing helped her see and unsee the care facilities. In this encounter with residents Stina and Nora, for example, she discussed how she initially read their still fastened bibs as neglect. That's an almost moral judgment, seeing the care recipients as passive. However, when Stina begins to attend to the pencil and paper, which Cleeve previously merely thought of as tools, this assumption started unraveling with the center staging of these tools in her own drawings. Cleeve also later revisited and reflected on her drawings' hurried pace, as several things had been happening at once in this encounter. Here, Cleeve's work extends the sense of what I call aesthetics. It shows how counter and aesthetics might operate through small, diffuse, caring adjustments. At first, Cleeve, Stina, and Nora were anesthetized. The scene appears dull and aligns with a common knowledge, an assumption of daily life in dementia care. The aesthetic act of reciprocal drawing interrupts that numbness. It made them all sense again. Knowledge here becomes a being in common. When Stina engages with the pencil and paper, Cleeve's perception is reconfigured. Imagination and emotion are restitched through the bursting of bubbles to see otherwise, where empathy and curiosity emerged along with shared action. It's an aesthetic reassembling of their roles and identities. Cleeve highlights the significance of time in her way of seeing and unseeing. I find resonances of time in my field practice with the Cardboard Network in Hong Kong as well. Like Cleeve, while spending time to understand, drawing gave me something to do in the setting. In my case, however, spending time with people was connected tightly to the cardboard waste as the root's common thing, focusing on aesthetics' role in transformation. In one of my examples earlier, I began drawing in this field practice when everyone was away from the cubicle, right? During the day, several members of my host group momentarily returned, so they also saw the gradual process of material transformation over time, which impacted their imagination and emotion of the cubicle we hung out in. Temporality and material transformation often seems to take prominence in Dryden Goodwin's practice as well. In his iconic linear, his drawing process is revealed through time-lapse videos, showing them as traces of his act of drawing. While Cleeve worked in intimate spaces and I worked in private cubicles in public spaces, both of us could perceive participants' immediate responses feeding back to our drawings. In comparison, Goodwin's breathe, however intimately made, functions more like a public call, resembling graffiti but with a programming infrastructure that extends its impact. Here, the artwork must sustain itself as conversations unfold through it, even in the artist's absence. Speaking about his iterations of breathe, Goodwin recalled watching his father draw and described drawing as similar to sculpting. The bodies he drew as porous forms emerging through the ultra-thin pencil in his hands. These bodies projected onto buildings ephemerally mark urban structures, materializing in public space and inviting engagement, a kind of drawing in of his viewers through the rhythm of breathing. Goodwin's aesthetic decisions balance necessity and practicality. His considerations of scale and materiality intertwine with the imagination and emotion that he wants his drawings to affect in public space. Knowing his lines would be significantly enlarged, he kept his drawings small to preserve their fragility and make animating thousands of frames feasible. At times, he worked through a watchmaker's visor, like staring too long at the sun. His concentrated gaze locked into a sense of the person he drew. In Breathe, he maintains that his fragile lines became carriers of urgent information, as he renders breathing as a rhythm against the threat of stillness, to him a signal of survival. In their 2017 case study of Egypt's revolutionary graffiti, Awad Wegener and Glavianu analyzed responses from the government and the general public. Some members of the public reviewed revolutionary graffiti as anarchic and unclear, doubting its ability to communicate effectively. They argued that if an artwork's message is too obscure, it fails to engage or reach a wider audience. Despite Breathe's programming infrastructure, Sasha Engelman's 2014 analysis helps us understand its immediate public reception. Some viewers discuss Breathe through bodily terms, while others felt their body resonate with its interrupted breathing, as Goodwin reflects while making the work. Engelman notes that these reveal how Breathe makes air's material and affective presence palpably felt. The core theme of Breathe is a very common thing, air, which is more than ubiquitous. It's essential to our survival. However, as Rosamund Adokisi-Debrah stated, as cited by Lucy Sabin in her article, we definitely don't all breathe the same air. It's a myth. Lung disease is a poor person's disease. While Kisi-Debrah's statement names the inequality within this most common thing, Goodwin aesthetics renders air through breathing as an embodied experience that makes us sense together. It works as counter anesthetics. It resensitizes us to what we take for granted, to the fragility of air, and to our uneven capacity to breathe within it. If I must conclude here, what do drawings and drawings do as things in common? In Cleeve's care settings, drawing reassembled relations through small, reciprocal gestures of attention. In my own encounters, from the wrong kindergarten drawing to the cardboard cubicle, it transformed everyday materials and assumptions into shared moments of sensing that reconfigure relations. In Goodwin's Breathe, it reconfigures people's relations with air itself into collective embodied awareness. All very similar. Across these scales, drawing as counter anesthetics reassembles imagination and emotion, transforms the common into relation. They change common things into things in common and bring further things in common into being. So with that, I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.